The rain was tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers, each drop distorting the streetlights outside into tiny explosions of color. I had been parked there for almost an hour, staring at the same cracked dashboard, the same worn-out steering wheel that had carried me through every failed job interview, every city I'd tried to start over in. The hum of the engine was the only thing keeping me company. I couldn't afford to waste gas, but silence had begun to feel heavier than hunger. It had been 5 months since I'd lost my apartment. Since then, this car had been my home, my kitchen, my bed. The smell of stale coffee and wet clothes clung to me like a second skin. I'd grown used to sleeping in the backseat, knees pulled close to my chest, pretending the world outside didn't exist, pretending I wasn't a man who'd once been promised everything. Before all this, I'd been someone with a future. I had a decent job as an assistant architect, a small but steady paycheck, and an even smaller apartment. But there had been a time when I was told I'd never need to worry about money. My grandfather used to say, "No one in this family will ever go hungry." He had built a real estate empire from nothing, brick by brick, deal by deal. But when he passed, everything changed. His death didn't just fracture the family, it shattered it. The day of his funeral was the last time I saw my parents. They arrived late, dressed in designer black, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, as if grief could be accessorized. My uncles and cousins filled the front rows, whispering about shares, assets, and property deeds. And then there was me, the one who'd been written off, the one who had dropped out of business school, who'd chosen art over finance, emotion over logic, as my father used to say with disgust. When the lawyer started reading the will, everyone leaned forward like vultures waiting for a carcass. My cousins got penthouses, yachts, million-dollar accounts. My father got a chain of hotels, my mother a villa in Spain, and me, I got a sealed envelope. I can still feel the silence that followed. The sound of the paper tearing as I opened it, hands shaking, the room spinning as I read the single line inside. "Find what I left for you. The truth lies where it began." That was it, no address, no explanation, just those 12 words. I asked the lawyer what it meant, but he only shrugged. "Your grandfather was particular," he said. "He always believed lessons should be earned." My family laughed. My father smirked. "Maybe he left you a mirror," he said, "so you can finally see the failure he saw." That was 2 years ago. I spent every dollar I had trying to find what he left. I visited every property he ever owned, every house, every warehouse, every cabin. Nothing. Every clue led to a dead end, until I ran out of money, friends, and options. Until this car became the last thing with my name on it. Tonight was supposed to be just another night of survival, but then something strange happened. Around midnight, a soft knock echoed against the window. My first instinct was fear. It's never good news when someone knocks on your car in the dark. I rolled the window down just enough to see. A man stood there, soaked to the bone, holding an umbrella. His suit was expensive but wrinkled, like he'd been walking for miles in the rain. His voice was low, calm, steady. "Are you Mr. Daniel Pierce?" I nodded, unsure how to respond. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope, old, yellowed around the edges, sealed with red wax. My breath caught. I hadn't seen that seal in years. It was the same one my grandfather used for every letter he sent. "Where did you get this?" I asked. The man didn't answer. He simply handed it to me through the cracked window. "Your grandfather wanted you to have it," he said. Then he turned and walked away, vanishing into the rain before I could say another word. For a long moment I couldn't move. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and something else, a small metal key. The paper was handwritten, the ink faded but clear. "Daniel. If you're reading this, it means you haven't given up. That alone makes you worthy. You'll find the answers at the place where I built everything and lost it all. Go there. The truth and your future wait beneath the floor." There was no signature, no address, but I knew exactly what it meant. The place where I built everything and lost it all. My grandfather had told me that story 100 times when I was a kid. Before the empire, before the millions, he had started with a single property, an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of Redwood County. It was there he made his first deal, the place where everything began. And years later, it was also where his first project burned down. He used to call it his lesson in loss. The farmhouse was still there, or at least it should be. I hadn't been there since I was 10, but I could still picture it. The faded red barn, the crooked windmill, the smell of dry earth and old wood. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. If this was another dead end, it would be the last one. I didn't have anything left to lose. By morning, I was on the highway, the envelope tucked safely in my jacket. The road stretched out before me like a gray ribbon, empty and endless. My phone's GPS said it would take 4 hours to reach Redwood. I hadn't eaten in almost a day, but adrenaline was keeping me awake. The thought of that key, the mystery it represented, burned in my chest like a secret waiting to explode. As I drove, memories came flooding back. My grandfather's voice, his rough hands guiding mine as I held a hammer for the first time, the way he smiled when I told him I wanted to design buildings, not own them. Then build something worth standing in, he'd said. Money fades, work remains. I arrived in Redwood by late afternoon. The town looked smaller than I remembered, a cluster of aging houses, an empty gas station, the same diner with its neon sign flickering half dead. But as I drove down the old dirt road leading to the farmhouse, my heart started to pound. The place looked frozen in time. The barn was half collapsed, the paint on the main house peeled to its bones, and yet it was exactly as I'd remembered. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through cracked windows. The air was thick with the smell of rot and nostalgia. Every step I took echoed like a whisper. The wooden floor groaned beneath me, fragile and uneven. I ran my fingers along the walls, feeling the rough texture of time. I found the cellar door behind the kitchen, a trapdoor covered in years of dirt. The lock was rusted, but the key fit perfectly. When I turned it, a faint click echoed through the silence. I hesitated, holding my breath, then pulled the door open. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. The air was cold, damp, filled with the smell of earth and something metallic. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Each step groaned under my weight. At the bottom was a small, concrete room, empty except for a single wooden chest sitting in the center. The same red wax seal marked its lid. My heart raced as I knelt beside it. My hands shook when I lifted the latch. Inside were stacks of old photographs, yellowed documents, and a leather-bound notebook. On top of everything else was a photograph of my grandfather, young, smiling, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize, and written on the back in his handwriting. She knew before anyone else, follow her name. I stared at the picture, my pulse hammering in my ears. The woman's eyes looked familiar, too familiar. I flipped through the documents, searching for something, anything that made sense. Then I found it, an old property deed, signed under 2 names. Henry Pierce and Evelyn Carter. Evelyn Carter. The name meant nothing to me, but beneath it, scribbled in faded ink, was an address, one that didn't belong to any property my family ever mentioned. It was in a city I'd never been to, 200 miles away. I stood there in that cold cellar, holding the photo, the letter, the key that had brought me here. Everything I thought I knew about my grandfather, about my family, began to unravel, because Evelyn Carter wasn't just some stranger from his past. She was my grandmother's sister, and for some reason, her name had been erased from every family record we ever kept. I didn't understand why yet, but I knew one thing for certain. The truth I'd been searching for all this time wasn't buried in money or land. It was buried in secrets. I sat in the car outside the old farmhouse for hours, the photograph trembling in my hands. The rain had stopped, but the world outside still looked washed in gray. The name, Evelyn Carter, echoed through my head like a riddle I couldn't solve. My grandmother's sister, someone no one in the family had ever mentioned, someone erased, forgotten, buried. My grandfather had built an empire and left behind a storm of inheritance battles, yet the one secret he guarded until death was a name. By the time I started the engine, night had already fallen. My headlights cut through the fog as I drove back to the highway, the address from the deed glowing on my phone screen. It was in a coastal town called Havenport, a place I'd never heard of. 200 miles away, somewhere near the sea. I didn't know what I was going to find there, but every instinct told me that turning back wasn't an option anymore. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a dark ribbon of asphalt vanishing into mist. My gas light flickered, and I stopped at a dimly lit station off Route 51. The attendant was an old man with tired eyes who looked like he'd seen too many nights like this one. As he filled the tank, he noticed the envelope on my passenger seat. "That's an old seal," he said, pointing with a trembling hand. "Haven't seen one like that since the Pierce estate burned down." I froze. "You knew Henry Pierce?" The old man nodded slowly. Everyone around here did. He used to come by in a red truck, always smiling, always talking about rebuilding. But after that fire at the farm, he disappeared, never came back. Folks said he lost everything that night. Some say he buried something before leaving. Others say he came back years later, but no one ever saw him again. "Do you remember anyone named Evelyn Carter?" I asked. He frowned, thinking hard. "Carter, yes, there was a woman, lived up north near the cliffs. She ran a small inn, kept to herself. Some said she was related to him, but the family stopped speaking after something happened. Nobody knew what, but it was bad. The old man's words stuck with me as I drove on. The night grew colder, and the road wound tighter as I neared the coast. By dawn, I reached Havenport. It was a quiet town perched on the edge of the sea, where the wind carried salt and secrets in equal measure. The waves crashed against the cliffs in steady rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the fog. The address led me to a narrow road lined with pine trees and wild grass. At the end stood a small inn, weathered but still standing, its sign swaying gently in the breeze, the Seabird's Rest asterisk. The paint was peeling, and one of the windows had been boarded up, but the place had a strange kind of dignity, like it refused to die. I parked out front and sat there for a moment, watching the curtains flutter in the upstairs window. My heart thudded in my chest. I didn't know if anyone still lived there, but when I stepped out of the car and rang the bell, footsteps echoed from inside. The door creaked open. A woman in her late 50s stood there, gray hair tied in a loose bun, her expression cautious but kind. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone named Evelyn Carter," I said, my voice catching slightly. Her face changed instantly. She didn't speak for a long moment, then she stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The inn smelled of old wood and salt air. The walls were lined with photographs, guests from decades past, sailors, travelers, families smiling in black and white. The woman led me to a small sitting room with lace curtains and a flickering fireplace. "My name is Clara," she said, sitting across from me. "Evelyn Carter was my mother." My pulse quickened. "Then you might know my grandfather, Henry Pierce." Her eyes softened with something that looked like pain. "Oh, I knew him," she said quietly. "He was the reason my mother's life was ruined." I leaned forward. "What happened?" Clara looked into the fire as if it held the answer. "They loved each other once," she said. "But Henry was already married to your grandmother. When my mother found out, she tried to end it. She left town, started this inn, tried to build a new life, but he kept coming back. He promised he'd leave everything behind for her. Then the fire happened. My mother always believed it wasn't an accident." I felt my stomach twist. "You think someone said it?" "She did," Clara whispered. "She believed your family wanted her gone. After that night, Henry disappeared. My mother received one letter a year later from him. It only said, 'I'm sorry for everything. Take care of our child.'" I stared at her, speechless. "Your mother had a child with my grandfather." Clara nodded slowly. "Yes, that child was me." The room seemed to spin. My grandfather had another family. A secret daughter. That meant Clara was my aunt. My entire family had hidden her existence, erased her, just like Evelyn. Clara handed me a small wooden box from the mantel. "My mother kept this sealed until the day she died. She said it wasn't meant for me, it was meant for the one who would come looking." Inside the box was a small silver pendant and a folded note written in the same familiar handwriting. "Daniel, if you found her, you're close. The truth you seek isn't mine anymore, it's yours to finish. There's one more key, hidden where the waves touch stone. Follow the lighthouse." The pendant wasn't jewelry. It was a key, thin, rusted, shaped like an anchor. I looked up at Clara, my hands trembling. "Do you know what this means?" She nodded. "There's an old lighthouse on the North Cliffs. It's been closed for years. My mother said Henry used to go there when he visited Havenport. It was the only place he felt peace." Within the hour, I was back on the road, the pendant key clutched in my hand. The cliffs were steep and wild, the air thick with mist. When the lighthouse came into view, it looked like something out of another time, tall, cracked, leaning slightly against the wind. The metal door was locked with a heavy chain, but the anchor-shaped key fit perfectly. Inside, the air was damp and cold. My footsteps echoed as I climbed the spiral stairs, each step creaking beneath me. The light chamber at the top was filled with dust and silence. But near the center, on the stone floor, lay a small iron safe embedded into the ground. The key slid in easily, turning with a sound that echoed like thunder. Inside was a stack of papers, deeds, letters, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. I tore it open. "Daniel, if you're here, then you've done what no one else in our family ever could. You searched not for money, but for meaning. Everything I built was cursed by greed." I hid what mattered most from them, because they never would have understood. This empire wasn't built from gold, it was built from guilt, and it belongs to the one who breaks the cycle. Beneath the letter was a folder labeled * Pierce Holdings Transfer Agreement. My name was on it, so was Clara's. There was also a second note, written in a different hand, Evelyn's handwriting. "Henry never forgave himself for what happened to me, but he wanted our child to know peace. If this finds you, remember this. Forgiveness is worth more than inheritance. I sank to the floor, surrounded by ghosts. The papers in my hands felt heavier than stone. My grandfather hadn't left me money, he'd left me a choice, to either claim what was once his or destroy it all to end the war he'd started. As I stared out the window, the ocean crashed violently against the rocks below. I could almost hear his voice again. Build something worth standing in. That night, I didn't drive away. I stayed in the lighthouse until dawn, reading every letter, every confession, every memory he'd buried. There were receipts from charities, plans for projects he never finished, even a letter to my father, one that had never been sent. It read, "Matthew, if you're reading this, you've already taken everything that can be taken. But what you've lost, what we've all lost, is the one thing that mattered: family. If Daniel ever finds his way back to this place, let him have what you couldn't, the truth." By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. I drove back to the inn and handed Clara the folder. "Half of this belongs to you," I said, "and the other half, I want to use it to rebuild this town." She stared at me, stunned. "You're giving it away." "I'm setting it free," I said. "He left this to end the cycle. Maybe it's time someone did." "Oh." Clara smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You sound just like him." We stood there in silence for a long moment, the sea wind filling the air between us. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't running anymore. As I turned to leave, Clara called out softly, "There's something else. My mother once said the lighthouse wasn't the end, it was the beginning. There's one last thing your grandfather wanted you to find." I paused at the door. "What is it?" She looked past me toward the cliffs. "He called it the vault." The wind howled through the trees, carrying her words like a warning, and in that moment, I knew my journey wasn't over yet. The wind tore across the cliffs, carrying the sound of the ocean crashing below. The word vault kept replaying in my head as I drove along the winding coastal road, the old lighthouse shrinking behind me. I didn't know what I was supposed to find, but my instincts screamed that my grandfather had left one final message, something he couldn't entrust to paper, something only I was meant to see. By the time I reached the edge of Havenport, night had fallen. The sea shimmered under the moonlight like liquid glass, and the sound of waves against stone was almost hypnotic. I parked the car near the shoreline and stepped out into the cold air. The pendant key, shaped like an anchor, hung heavy around my neck. The cliffs rose tall and jagged in the distance, a fortress of black stone and salt spray. Clara's words echoed in my mind. He called it the vault. She hadn't known exactly what it was, only that her mother once said Henry built something on the cliffs before the fire, something meant to survive him. I followed the shoreline, guided only by the moonlight and the sound of the sea. My shoes slipped against the slick rocks, the wind howling in my ears. Then in the distance I saw it, a structure half buried in the cliffside. From afar it looked like an abandoned storage bunker, its steel door rusted and overgrown with ivy. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange carved above the entrance, the family crest of the Pierces, an iron anchor surrounded by laurels. My breath caught. This was it. The door was massive, locked by an old mechanism that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. There was no visible keyhole, only a round depression in the center shaped like the pendant I wore. I pressed it into place. A faint click echoed through the stone, and with a low groan the door began to shift. Dust fell from above as gears turned behind the walls, and slowly the vault opened. Inside was darkness. The air smelled of metal and age. I stepped inside carefully, my flashlight cutting through the black. The corridor stretched deep into the cliff, lined with stone and steel supports. As I walked, the temperature dropped, and I began to see something glimmering faintly ahead. When I reached the end, I found a circular chamber, its ceiling arched and reinforced with thick beams. In the center stood a single table made of concrete. On it lay a leather folder, a small box, and an object wrapped in cloth. The moment I touched the folder, I recognized my grandfather's handwriting. The title read, "Pierce Foundation Contingency Records." Inside were detailed plans, architectural blueprints, and ledgers, hundreds of pages listing properties, transactions, and trust accounts I never knew existed. But it wasn't just business documents. There were letters, too, ones written to people I'd never heard of. One name appeared over and over again, E. Carter. Evelyn had been involved in everything. She wasn't just a secret lover. She'd been his partner, the silent architect behind the empire. I found sketches signed with both their initials. Projects dated long before my father was even born. My grandfather hadn't built his fortune alone. He'd erased her from history to protect his reputation, and in doing so had destroyed the only person who truly helped him. I felt my throat tighten. The man I had idolized as a child wasn't the legend the family worshipped. He was human, flawed. And maybe that was the truth he wanted me to face. I turned to the small box next. Inside was a pocket watch, gold, engraved with the same anchor symbol. When I opened it, I saw a tiny folded photo tucked inside. My grandfather and Evelyn stood side by side, smiling, a young girl between them, Clara. Beneath the photo was a small engraved inscription, "For the one who restores what I broke." I stood in silence, the weight of it sinking into me. The inheritance wasn't money, it was redemption. The last object on the table was wrapped in aged cloth. When I unfolded it, I found a keycard, cracked but still legible. The words "Pierce Holdings Central Access" were printed across it. A single note was taped to the back. "Only one door remains locked. Use this when you're ready to end what I began." It was then I realized that this vault wasn't just a memorial. It was a blueprint for the truth, and that the final door was still waiting somewhere. I drove back to town before sunrise. The roads were empty, and the lighthouse stood like a sentinel in the distance, its glass reflecting the first light of dawn. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The keycard glowed faintly in the dashboard light. When I reached Havenport's main square, I found an old public library that looked like it hadn't seen visitors in years. The sign outside read Carter Memorial Library. The surname hit me hard. Evelyn's legacy had survived here, hidden in plain sight. Inside, the librarian, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, looked up from his desk. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for records on the Pierce family," I said, "specifically Henry Pierce and Evelyn Carter." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "You look like him," he said. "Henry came here once, a long time ago, said he wanted to leave something behind, something that would make sense one day." The librarian led me to a back room lined with file cabinets. Dust floated in the air like ash. He unlocked one drawer labeled Archives, 1980s. Inside were files, newspaper clippings, and property records. Among them was one document marked in red ink, Pierce Industrial Redevelopment Plan, Confidential. I opened it and froze. It wasn't a plan, it was a confession. My grandfather had written that the fire at the farm wasn't an accident. It had been staged by his own brother, my great-uncle, to force Evelyn out of the picture and take control of the business. Henry had covered it up to protect his family's name, but he had carried the guilt for decades. The plan detailed a separate trust fund, one built quietly through side investments, hidden even from his partners. He called it Project Haven. Its purpose was written in his own words: to rebuild what greed destroyed, to return every stolen piece to the hands it was meant for. And beneath that was a set of coordinates and a date, March 17, 2025. 2 days from now. I stared at the page, my pulse racing. He had planned this, every step. The envelope, the key, the letters, they were all pieces of a path leading here. 2 days from now, something was going to happen at those coordinates. I copied them down and thanked the librarian. As I turned to leave, he stopped me. "Be careful, son," he said softly. "Secrets like these don't stay buried without reason." Outside, the wind had picked up. The sea roared louder than before, waves crashing against the docks as if warning me to turn back. But I couldn't. The coordinates led inland, to a city I knew all too well, New York, the heart of everything my grandfather built, and the last place I ever wanted to return to. By the time I crossed the state border, the sky was turning violet with dawn. The city rose like a beast out of the mist, its skyline jagged and cold. My father still lived there. So did the rest of the family. If my grandfather's final plan was hidden in New York, it meant facing the people who had laughed at me, the ones who had buried his truth to protect their lies. I parked the car near the edge of Manhattan and looked out at the glass towers. The coordinates pointed to an address in Lower Manhattan, one of the oldest Pierce-owned properties, long abandoned and boarded up. It used to be the company's first headquarters before my father relocated to a modern skyscraper uptown. When I reached the building, I found the front gates chained, a faded sign reading "Condemned." But the lock on the side door was old, and the keycard from the vault slid perfectly into the rusted reader. A green light blinked once, and the lock clicked open. Inside, dust and darkness swallowed me whole. The air smelled like paper and metal, the remnants of a forgotten empire. My flashlight beam swept across empty desks and shattered glass until it landed on something strange, a reinforced steel door at the far end of the hall, unlike anything else in the building. Above it, a plaque read, "Foundation Archives." My heart pounded as I approached. The keycard reader beside it glowed faintly. I swiped the card. The light turned green. The door hissed open, revealing a hidden room lined with shelves and safety boxes. In the center stood a glass case, sealed tight, with a single document inside labeled Final Testament of Henry Pierce. My knees felt weak as I lifted the glass and pulled the envelope free. Inside were several letters, each addressed to different family members, including one with my name on it. I unfolded it slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. Daniel. If you found this, it means you've seen the truth. You know what I did, what I hid, and why. The others will never understand, but you will. I have left you the means to dismantle this empire piece by piece and rebuild it the way it was meant to be, honest, clean, real. The fortune you seek isn't in the accounts or the deeds. It's in the people we wronged. Restore them and you'll find more than wealth. You'll find peace. Tears blurred my vision as I read the final line. You are my redemption, Daniel. Don't let them bury you the way they buried me. At that moment, footsteps echoed from behind. The door slammed shut. My father's voice filled the darkness. So this is where he hid you. Oh. He stepped into the light, his face sharp, eyes cold. You think you're the hero of his story, don't you? You think he chose you over us. I stood frozen, the letter still in my hand. He didn't choose me, I said quietly. He chose the truth. My father's smile was razor thin. Then let's see if you can handle what that really means. He reached into his coat and the light flickered. And for the first time, I realized that the real danger wasn't the secrets my grandfather left behind. It was the people willing to kill to keep them buried. The air inside the archives felt heavy, as though every word written there carried the weight of decades. My father stood just a few feet away, the dim light flickering across his face. His eyes were sharp, but beneath that arrogance I saw something else: fear. He held a folded paper in one hand, and I noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. I knew you'd come looking, he said finally, voice low. You were always too much like him. I tightened my grip on the letter. You mean too stubborn to live in your shadow. He gave a cold laugh. No, too foolish to understand that truth destroys people. Henry thought he could cleanse his legacy by confessing. He didn't care who he ruined in the process. Not me, not this family. You buried the truth, I said. You turned his mistake into your empire. He took a slow step closer. That's what men do, Daniel. We survive. He built everything with lies and I perfected them. That's why I'm still here. Oh. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Every memory of being dismissed, every sneer, every insult came flooding back. The man in front of me wasn't just my father. He was the face of everything I had been running from since the day they called me worthless. What's in this room changes everything, I said, and you know it. He smiled faintly, but his eyes hardened. You think a few papers can rewrite history. You're naive. The moment you step out of this building, those files vanish. Do you really think I'd let you destroy what 3 generations built? Something in me snapped. You already destroyed it, I said. You just didn't notice. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the hum of the building the only sound between us. Then he moved toward the table, reaching for the documents. I stepped in front of him. Don't, I warned. His expression changed. You're not ready for this, Daniel. Walk away before it swallows you too. I can't, I said. He trusted me to finish this. My father's voice dropped to a whisper. He trusted you because he pitied you. You were never his heir, you were his excuse. The words hit harder than any punch. For a second, I almost believed him. But then I remembered the farmhouse, the letter, the vault, all the things Henry had planned long before I ever knew they existed. My grandfather didn't pity me. He prepared me. I opened my jacket and pulled out the pendant key, the same one that had opened the vault. My father's eyes flickered. Where did you get that? Oh, you already know, I said. You buried the woman who helped him build everything, and he buried the truth where you'd never look with her. He lunged for me, grabbing my arm, but I twisted away. The letter slipped from my hand and scattered across the floor. I could see the anger twisting his face into something almost unrecognizable. You don't understand what you're dealing with, he hissed. Those documents don't just belong to us. There are people, powerful people, who will burn this city to keep them hidden. Then let them come, I said. I'm done hiding. For a second, neither of us moved. The wind from a broken window sent dust swirling between us. Then he turned slowly and walked toward the exit. You're your grandfather's mistake all over again, he said without looking back, and this time I won't clean it up. When the door slammed shut, the silence that followed was deafening. I sank to the floor, the letter still crumpled in my hand. The The truth was no longer just an inheritance, it was a weapon, and I had to decide how to use it. By the time I left the building, dawn was breaking. The city was waking up, indifferent to the storm brewing inside me. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying his words. Each mile between us felt like shedding an old skin. I stopped near the Hudson River, parked the car, and stared out at the water. The letters, the files, the entire archive sat in a bag on the passenger seat. The easy choice would have been to destroy them, to let the past die quietly. But I couldn't. My grandfather's voice wouldn't let me. "You are my redemption, Daniel. Don't let them bury you." The next day I returned to Havenport. The sea was rougher, the sky painted with gray clouds that looked ready to burst. I found Clara at the inn, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. When she saw me, she smiled softly, as though she already knew I would come back. "You found him," she said. "I found more than that," I replied, setting the bag on the table. "He left something behind for both of us." Clara opened the bag carefully, pulling out the letters and the pendant. As she read through the papers, her eyes filled with tears. "He was trying to fix it," she whispered. "All this time I thought he abandoned us, but he was trying to protect us." "He wanted you to have this," I said, handing her the pocket watch. "It belonged to him." She turned it over in her hands, her expression softening. "He used to say time was the only thing he couldn't buy back," she murmured. I nodded. "He wanted us to rebuild what he lost." Together, we spent hours going through the documents. There were detailed plans for something called the Haven Project, a charitable foundation meant to restore housing, schools, and community centers in towns affected by the Pierce developments. My grandfather had secretly started it under Evelyn's name, funding it quietly through offshore accounts. It was unfinished, forgotten, until now. Clara looked up from the papers. "You could bring it back," she said. "You could make it real again." I thought about it, staring out the window toward the sea. For years, I had chased money, validation, something to prove I mattered. But this was different. This wasn't about power. It was about purpose. "I'm going to finish what he started," I said, "and I'm going to do it in both their names." She smiled through her tears. "Then maybe the curse ends here." We spent the next few days organizing everything, making copies, and reaching out to the few people who had once worked for Henry Pierce. Some of them were old, retired, but they remembered him. And when they heard his plan was coming back to life, they wanted to help. Word spread faster than I expected, but so did the danger. On the fourth night, as I was leaving the inn, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It had been there the night before, too. I pretended not to notice, but the tension in my chest told me someone was watching. By the time I reached the cliffs near the lighthouse, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. They followed me for miles. I stopped near the edge of the overlook, where the ocean thundered below. The SUV stopped behind me, its doors opening in unison. 3 men stepped out, dressed in dark coats. One of them called out, "Mr. Pierce, you've been busy." My pulse quickened. "Who sent you?" "Let's just say some of your grandfather's associates aren't thrilled about his little legacy project." One of them pulled out a small envelope. "You have something they want. Hand it over and you walk away." I hesitated. The bag was still in the car, the documents inside. I glanced toward the sea. The wind howled louder now, waves crashing violently against the rocks. "I don't think that's an option," I said. The man smiled faintly. "Then this ends here." He stepped forward, but before he could reach me, a car screeched up behind them. Clara jumped out, shouting something I couldn't hear over the wind. The men turned toward her, startled, and in that split second I grabbed the bag and ran toward the cliff's edge. "Daniel, stop," she cried. I turned back just once. "Tell them the truth isn't for sale," I said. Then I tossed the bag over the edge. It vanished into the roaring sea below. The men shouted, but it was too late. Everything, every lie, every confession, every secret was gone. For a moment I felt empty, but then a strange peace settled over me. My grandfather's empire was finally free from the chains that bound it. The men retreated, realizing there was nothing left to take. Clara ran to me, her face pale with fear. "You could have died," she said, gripping my arm. "Maybe," I said, breathing hard, "but some things deserve to end." We stood there together, the storm breaking overhead, rain washing the last of the dirt and dust from the stones. The ocean roared below, swallowing the last remnants of the past. When the rain stopped, the horizon began to glow with morning light. I turned to Clara. "It's over," I said. She shook her head gently. "No, Daniel, it's just beginning." That night I drove back to the city one last time. I filed the official paperwork for the Haven Project using funds my grandfather had hidden under Evelyn's name. Clara's signature went beside mine as co-founder. The news spread within days, a new foundation, born from the ashes of a scandal no one could trace. For the first time, the name Pierce stood for something good. Months later, I stood again at the lighthouse. The sea was calm, the air clear. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the wind. "You built something worth standing in." I smiled faintly, whispering into the wind, "I did, and this time it won't burn." The day the foundation officially launched, the city looked different to me. The skyline that once felt like a fortress now seemed like an open horizon. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the towers of power that had crushed generations of my family. I saw possibilities. The Haven Project had become real. It wasn't just an idea trapped in a letter anymore. It was alive, breathing, moving forward. And for the first time, so was I, the first site we rebuilt was the old Pierce factory district on the west side of the river. The same buildings that once leaked poison into the ground were now being transformed into housing and schools. I stood on the cracked pavement one morning as construction machines tore through the rusted fences, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Clara stood beside me, holding the same silver pendant that had once been my key. It had become the symbol of the project, a reminder that something broken could still unlock something new. "Do you think he'd be proud?" she asked quietly. I looked out at the site, imagining Henry standing there, watching it all come alive again. "Maybe not proud," I said, "but I think he'd finally breathe easy." We watched as the old sign that read Pierce Industries was taken down. In its place, a new one was raised, Haven Foundation. The crowd that had gathered clapped softly. A few local journalists took photos, but this time I didn't flinch from the cameras. I wasn't the forgotten son anymore. I was just someone trying to make things right. For a while, things were good, better than I'd ever imagined they could be. But life has a way of testing peace the same way it tests pain. 2 weeks after the launch, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single line typed neatly on white paper. "You can rebuild the world, but you can't erase blood." No signature, no hint of who sent it. I showed it to Clara that night. She frowned, tracing the words with her finger. "Do you think it's from your father?" I shook my head. He wouldn't send something like this. He'd rather face me himself. But the message unsettled me. It was a reminder that not everyone was ready to let the past die quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I drove out to the lighthouse again, the one place that still felt like mine. The ocean was calm, the sky littered with stars. I sat on the rocks, the wind cool against my face, and pulled out the last of Henry's letters, the one I hadn't opened until now. The envelope was yellowed with age, the edges frayed. "Daniel," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the truth has survived longer than I have. What comes next will not be easy. The empire I built was never just mine. It belonged to men who hide behind names, who use legacies like weapons. They will come for what I left you because they think it still holds power. But you must remember, power dies with possession. Meaning lives through action. If they come, show them what endurance looks like. The sea takes everything, but it always gives something back." I folded the letter and stared at the waves. Somewhere out there in the black water lay everything that once defined the Pierce legacy. Letters, ledgers, lies. Maybe it was poetic justice that the ocean held them now, a silent graveyard for generations of greed. A light flickered in the distance, a fishing boat, small and steady. I watched it until it disappeared into the fog. For the first time, I understood what my grandfather meant. The world doesn't remember men for their wealth. It remembers them for what they build when everything else is gone. The next morning, I received a call from one of our contractors at the construction site. "Mr. Pierce," he said urgently, "you need to come down here. We found something." When I arrived, workers were gathered around a section of the foundation where the ground had caved in slightly. In the dirt, half buried under concrete, was a rusted metal box. I knelt beside it, brushing off the soil. The latch was broken, but the box still held together. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were several black and white photographs and an old journal. The first photo was of the original Pierce factory workers in 1949. The second was of a young Henry Pierce standing beside Evelyn Carter. They were smiling, their hands covered in grease, eyes full of life. Beneath the photos, the journal told their story in Henry's handwriting, a record of the beginning before ambition turned it to ash. Page after page, he wrote about his dreams of building something honest, something that would give back to the people who helped him rise. And in the final entry, dated 2 years before the fire, he wrote, "If the world ever remembers my name, I want it to be because I tried again, not because I failed first." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. because I tried again. It was the simplest legacy, yet the hardest to live by. Over the next few months, the Haven Foundation grew beyond anything I could have expected. We opened our first community school in Havenport. The second project began in Boston, rebuilding old warehouses into art centers and shelters. People came from all over to volunteer. They didn't care about the Pierce name, they cared about the cause. And that was exactly how I wanted it. One afternoon, as I was reviewing blueprints at the office, I received a visitor, my father. He looked older, thinner, as if the weight of everything had finally started to crush him. His eyes scanned the walls lined with photos of the new projects. "You did it," he said quietly. "I didn't do it alone," I replied. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Your grandfather's dream, I used to think it was weakness, but maybe I was wrong." There was no apology in his voice, but there was something else, acknowledgement. That was enough. "You can still be part of it," I said, "if you want to." He gave a faint, tired smile. "No, Daniel, this was never meant for me. It's yours now." As he turned to leave, I noticed the faint limp in his walk, the way his shoulders slumped. For the first time, I didn't see a villain. I saw a man who'd lost his way and didn't know how to come back. Weeks later, I received a call from the hospital. My father had passed away in his sleep, heart failure. They found him with one of Henry's letters by his bedside. It simply said, "It's not too late." I stood by his grave on a cloudy morning, the wind cold and sharp. Clara stood beside me, silent. I didn't cry, but I felt something settle in my chest, a quiet forgiveness I didn't expect. "He was part of it too," I said softly, "even if he never knew how." Clara nodded. "Maybe that's how it works. We carry the pieces they leave behind." Months turned into a year. The Haven Foundation spread across 4 cities, touching lives that had once been forgotten. Every project carried a plaque that read, "Built on the belief that redemption is greater than inheritance." One evening I returned to Havenport for the anniversary of the foundation. The lighthouse had been restored, the beam sweeping gently across the sea. The inn had been turned into a retreat for artists and teachers. Clara greeted me at the door, older but smiling brighter than ever. "It feels different now," she said. "It's because it's alive," I replied. We walked down to the cliffs where it all began. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, calm and eternal. I took the silver pendant from around my neck and held it up. The anchor caught the last rays of the setting sun. "What will you do with it?" Clara asked. I looked at the horizon. "I'll let it rest where it belongs." With a deep breath, I threw the pendant into the sea. It arced through the air, flashing once before disappearing beneath the waves. The tide carried it away, and with it, everything that once bound me to the past. As night fell, we stood there in silence, the wind soft and the stars beginning to bloom above. For the first time in generations, the Pierce name meant hope instead of harm. And in that moment, I realized something my grandfather had tried to teach all along: redemption isn't inherited. It's earned one choice at a time. The sea whispered below, and I whispered back, "Thank you, Grandpa, I finally understand." The light from the restored lighthouse swept across the water, guiding ships through the darkness. And as it did, I knew it wasn't just guiding them, it was guiding me too. For the first time, I wasn't the boy who got nothing. I wasn't the forgotten son. I wasn't the heir to a broken empire. I was the man who rebuilt it, not for wealth, not for power, but for peace. And this time, it was going to last.